Hi, welcome to the American Intelligence Media. And today I'm Tyler Gabriel, and I'm with Douglas Gabriel and Michael McKibben, and we have an amazing report to give you. Now, many of you know that Douglas and I are former teachers, and we were in the school system for many, many years, private, public, and we can tell you firsthand that public schools today are nothing more than indoctrination centers for the globalists, people like that sit on the Pilgrim Society that continue to propagandize Americans. And it just doesn't exist in the fake news arena that we see on ABC, CBS, Fox News, the array of corporate media. It also exists in our schools. And what happens is that they give us history books to teach from and students to learn from that are nothing but propaganda. It tells history in a way that makes the globalists look good and the rest of us have no clue what history is. Well, thanks to the amazing researchers at Americans for Innovation, headed up by Michael McKibben, we have found truth history that every American, in fact, every patriot around the world needs to wake up and listen to, because this is a common history that we all share. And until we're awake at what these people, these evil people in the Pilgrim Society are doing to us and humanity, we need to wake up. So let me get Michael McKibben here. And let's see, I add you to the stream, and Douglas. But Michael, let's hear from you first. What's going on with fake history?
Well, the general word is propaganda. And one of the things I've observed is as long as we talk in general terms about propaganda, we really can't solve any problems. We can be aware that it's there, but not really identify it, not know where it's coming from, not know who's doing it, or what their motives for doing it are. That is the general notion that we've got to dig further if we're going to solve this problem of why are we being lied to and who's doing it. And as you know, we started a trek related to the theft of our social networking technology and our inventions, and to identify who did it and what they were doing and when they did it. And to cut a long story short, which we've talked about before, what we've identified now very clearly, unequivocally, to this engineer, it proves it and nails it, is that in the summer of 1909, a group of people, largely British, including American British correspondents of American newspapers, got together in London, sponsored fully by the Parliament, the monarch, and they hatched a new plan for how mankind was going to be organized in the future and how they were going to be the ones to do the organization. And they hatched a very long-term strategy for how they were going to do it. And there were a number of elements to it, but two that are key to understanding what's going on with fake news today was their complete fusion of communications technology at the time, which was telegraphy, and newspapers, and the use of those two fields by intelligence. And so what has been puzzling to all of us, I think, about what's going on now is we didn't understand this tight relationship between the intelligence world and the newspaper world, or now the media world. And what we discovered, to our great surprise, is that the newspapers of the world back in 1909 were the ones who organized modern intelligence. And they took it to the corporations, they took it to governments, and from that point on, they grabbed the power, which was the power to influence public opinion, and they have never let go. They have let certain players come in, but they continue to press this agenda, which we have now discovered was a 200-year agenda, which was articulated by Cecil Rhodes initially in South Africa and then brought to the United Kingdom. And they have never let go of that strategy to this day. And then they formed in 1902 an organization called the Pilgrim Society, which was basically going to be a way for them to expand the British aristocracy to allow certain American families who were basically the robber barons of the age. And we can talk about who that is. But they expanded the thinking to, instead of promoting the white race, they started promoting the English speaking race, or they actually called it the English speaking race, but then they called it the English speaking peoples later. And that would incorporate everyone in the Commonwealth. And then they decided that, in their benevolent opinion, they were going to be the ones to shape the future of the world. And they have largely been successful at doing that.
Now, it's a rather complicated story if you haven't been following it. So in the description box below, or you can find it on our CAT reports, we're going to give you a PDF that the researchers at Americans for Innovation just did. It's a 6-page PDF. It's great because it lays out everything in a timeline that you can see it. And you also have these amazing hyperlinks that take you to the evidence that show that what we're showing you is actual truth history. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have the copy of it here.
Yeah, great job.
It's a crime line. It is the target. And it shows that the research that comes out of Leader Technologies and yourself, Michael, and the people that you direct for the research, as well as the staff and writers at Americans for Innovation, really are the inventors of the intelligence that is behind what was supposed to be free speech on the internet. Because you and your researchers go and get things that cannot be found in any history book. And you get the evidence. And not only do you get the evidence, and you grab it, you put it in different forms, you send it out through the internet so that it can't ever be hidden again, so it can be archived. And you send it out to all these people, and then Betsy and her team send it out to all these people, and then people become awake. And what we have here is the necessity to thank you for your work, because this timeline, again, it's a crime line, and any prosecutor that wants to see how the fake news came about, who's guilty, what were their motives, exactly what was the mechanism, and how they institutionalized it, can simply read the reports that you can find on Aim for Truth, but also find on the timeline on Americans for Innovation, as well as this new summary. But now the new summary, remember President Trump said what? We are at war with fake news. Why? Because news was supposed to be the fourth estate supporting us, the people. Now it's the fourth estate, but who does it support? It supports corporations who have taken the place of religions. And then instead of a monarchy, except in Britain you have a monarchy, and you can clearly see that it was under the monarchy that these people ran this institutionalization of intelligence. And everyone knows all wars are based upon intelligence. And if you don't get proper intelligence, you can't vote for the right person. You don't know really whether the politicians are corrupt or crooked. You don't know if the policies of the administration are corrupt and crooked. The press is supposed to be there to reveal the truth to us so that we can then use our power to vote the right people in and out. And now what we see, exactly what Trump told us, we're at a war with the fake news, who is the Democratic Opposition Research Party. And it goes back to these Anglo-Saxon, and they're not Anglo-Saxon. And this is the proof of the pudding of what you're saying of propaganda. They have convinced us that the monarchy of England is English or Anglo-Saxon. It is not. It is German. And that's a fact. But that shows you that if you are part of the Pilgrim Society, you're probably going to be peerage in Britain, and you're going to be protected by the Queen's own courts. So this was set up from the beginning that it could not be destroyed. It's kind of like the odious debt of central banks. It's a lot like that because it's the same people. These are corporations using propaganda, brainwashing through the Frankfurt School type of philosophy and through war propaganda using the Tavistock Institute methodologies. And you have revealed that in a way that I myself, as a person who has a degree in history, I'm embarrassed that I didn't know these things. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank all the research. And that's my preliminary remark.
Yeah, well, maybe it took a civil engineer to get into the realm of what is normally history. We civil engineers weren't taught too much history. In fact, we found it rather boring. Now I know why it was boring, because it was all a lie. And civil engineers don't, I think as a group of people, we don't cotton well to um, dishonesty, lack of transparency, lack of genuineness. If we did that in our field, our buildings would all fall down. And so you can't do that. You've got to look at things the way they really are and not spin them and include propaganda in your reports. You can't do any of that stuff.
Yeah, but if you're a civil engineer and you care about the way things work, then what the heck happened to Building 7?
Oh, that was clearly a demolition. No
Yeah.
question in my mind.
And yet the media, the fake media, is not reporting it, and our fake history books will not report it. Who were the culprits behind 9/11, Douglas?
Well, you've got basic physics that prove that Building 7 was dynamited at all the right points in the structure itself, so that all the vertical columns that were supporting the load of the building would all collapse at the same moment. You can't get that. There's no way that could occur except by man-made intervention, in my opinion.
Military grade thermite. Yes. And Tower 7 was all set up to have its demolition go off. And we heard the person in charge actually say, pull it. And then we heard the bombs. We heard the explosions go off and the building fall. And we know that the plane that went down before it struck its mark and in the field in Pennsylvania was supposed to hit Tower 7. But it didn't matter. They went right on ahead with their plan and demolished it. But remember, the people who owned it had only owned it for months, the man who owns it. And remember that he got an insurance policy for all the buildings separately. Before that, they were a set of buildings. Remember that he made off like a bandit, billions of dollars off the deal. Remember that George H.W. Bush and the Durham-Brady bonds, $280 billion that they used to take down the Soviet Union with the help of Leo Wanta and George Soros, was what they were hiding, part of what they were hiding. There were many other investigations that had been moved to a FBI office in the very floor that the plane hit. The very first explosions were not from a plane, and they were called into the Port Authority, and the Port Authority had already responded to explosions on the 2 floors that the FBI had all the evidence that would have put a lot of people in jail. So I'm not going to go into all the details of that, Bessie, but when we're talking about fake news, look how they convinced everybody of that. This was a controlled demolition. I myself, the first time I saw the film of the 2 towers as they fell, beyond a shadow of a doubt knew that it was controlled demolition. But because it was on the news, anyone I said that to considered me evil, because I wasn't going along with the narrative. Right. And then we have the 911 fake, supported also by the media, the fake 911 commission report, completely fake, didn't look at any evidence whatsoever. That's the proof in the pudding of the effectiveness of behavioral manipulation through brainwashing, through media, which is in fact nothing more than yellow journalism and propaganda.
Well, the Daily Telegraph was started in the mid-1800s. And that was started by a man by the name of Lord Burnham. He wasn't a lord then, but he became a lord. And by the turn of the early 1900s, these newspaper people had already learned that the things that they would write in the newspaper would be believed without question. Their integrity was never questioned. And so they realized that they could tell lies just as easily as telling the truth. And what they had already learned by 1908, 1909, is that they could use those well-placed lies to line their pockets, to acquire power, and to take care of their friends, and that the banks would fall in line behind them, because the banks made money whether markets went up or went down. If you know the story you're going to run and how that affects the markets that you're invested in, then a little advanced knowledge is all you need to make a lot of money. And so they formed this very unholy, evil alliance between various power centers in our world. And we can see that now from the records, from the actual provable records at the parliament, within the newspapers themselves. And so by 1902, when Cecil Rhodes and Lord Alfred Milner and John Buchan and Lord Northcliffe and Lord Rosebery and that whole crowd of socialist, fascist corporatists. Now, these were the people that conceived of what we have seen in our lifetimes as communism, as Nazism, but it was all a foment of socialism. And what they recognized is that these aristocrats, if they were going to maintain power, they had to grab control of the communications capabilities of the planet so that they could continue to control their narratives and their lies to protect this little system that they had for themselves.
Yes, but it's been a long process because along the way, we're all attending public schools, and this even affects private schools, and we are being propagandized the whole way. We're believing in one thing, and we find out it's something different. I know for me, the big wake-up call was watching those buildings collapse on 9/11. I was infuriated.
Right.
I was not going to let this die. And I didn't know how it was going to happen because the internet wasn't working the way it works today. But I had to find truth. And I know there are a lot of patriots out there that felt the same thing. We're tired of this shit. I don't know what else to call it. I'm telling the Pilgrim Society and all of these thugs that are running our communities, our schools.
They had their bases covered.
Betsy DeVos. Sorry, Betsy DeVos. She's the head of the Department of Education. Is she unraveling this common crap curriculum and the propaganda that's in our schools? What's going on there? Because it's not going to stop if we continue to educate children in this perverted Frankfurt School Tavistock programming. And I'm very upset about it. And every patriot out there needs to be enraged that our government is doing this to us.
Exactly. Well, being in education, you've heard of a man by the name of Andrew Carnegie, haven't you?
Oh, of course. Runs the libraries. Everything in the libraries is what they want us to read.
They had their bases covered. Carnegie was there when the Pilgrim Society was founded, and they recognized if they were going to bring America back into their global British Empire coalition, they had to change American opinion about the British and about British history. They were very clear about that, and you can see it in the documents, and they are linked in some of the articles that have been published at AFI and on AIM. And they specifically knew that they had to, what they call correct histories, in order to get people to believe that the British were not as abusive as our American histories up until that time were indicating to the American student. And so what they specifically decided was that Andrew Carnegie was going to donate money to all of the libraries in the United States. And in the process of donating money to the libraries, anybody in nonprofit knows this, the donor has great power in defining the agenda for those types of nonprofit organizations as you go forward. So he would dole out cash to all of these libraries all around the country to do two things. One was to re-educate, revise the history of the British relationship to America, and then secondly, to make sure that the curriculum that was provided through the libraries to the schools achieved the Pilgrim's agenda. That was his task, and he was successful at it. I mean, the library in my hometown was heavily funded by Carnegie, and I'm sure all around you it's the same thing. We now have the documents. We can show you the specific libraries in the United States where Carnegie doled out all this cash in order to grab control of the history narrative. And that is the narrative that we were raised with, no question.
Oh yes, I mean the Chicago University took over, and we have no educational theory in this country whatsoever. If there is any theory that you could attribute to American education, it would be John Deweyism. In other words, the Dewey Decimal System, the library system. And what goes in the library was determined by the banksters. And that's just a fact. And that was from World War I. Now, after the Brits got us into World War I, we were very suspect. In World War II, we didn't want to join them. Woodrow Wilson ran on a platform of isolationism. But what really happened was, because the League of Nations never really got supported by America, and the Treaty of Versailles was never supported by America, because it was nothing more than a British imperialistic attempt to control basically the entire Levant, but essentially the whole world. We didn't sign up for that. But at the same time, even before World War II, there was the Carnegie, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Warburg, Goldman Sachs, Kuhn, Loeb, all of them supported a group called the Inquiry. And the Inquiry was nothing more than the lawyers of the richest robber barons in America, who then created the propaganda directly linked to the people that you showed us were at the 1909 Imperial Press Conference and became the Empire Press Union. Those are the same exact people still operative today. They run under the name of ISIS Management now, and a company that produces what's called Avid. They still produce the narrative to this very day. We are not talking about theories or conspiracies. We're talking about the fact that Dianne Feinstein's husband owns this, the controlling interest in this company. And so literally, folks, what is the fourth estate that's supposed to be supporting you is working against you. It is exactly what Donald Trump said. It is an attack on the United States Constitution and we the people.
Absolutely. Douglas, you mentioned this ISIS management, this system that pumps out these messages that come across the teleprompters along the chyrons at the bottom of the screen, whether you're CNN, NBC, Fox, whatever. And those are the messages that kind of get stuck in your head after you watch them go by so many times. Well, all of this type of programming, this type of propaganda was well researched by the early 1900s. This wasn't crude at all. They were very sophisticated. They knew what they were doing. And when you look at the newspaper business, which was quite robust at the formation of the Pilgrim Society, they were much stronger readers back then than we are today. We're more visual today. Their newspapers were called broadsheets because they had maybe 8-10 columns of newspaper articles. But the one fascinating element of this is propaganda doesn't need a lot of room to be successful. It just needs exposure. And so what we see in those newspapers is we see these short articles that were easy to read and that got the message across, and they just hammered every day. People would get their newspapers every day, and whatever the Daily Telegraph said, whatever the Daily Mail said, whatever the Times said, whatever the New York Times said, whatever the Washington Post said, whatever the Chicago Tribune said, that's the message that people believed. Now, when we look at the system that they were creating, they specifically, at the Imperial Press Conference in 1909, their task was to unify the news feeds for the entire British Empire throughout the world. And they were working out the technology to do that. And the technology for wireless, for example, had not been completely implemented by then, but they still had Marconi there as their little cardboard cutout to make sure that when wireless was fully implemented, it would be controllable from the whole planet. And then they would be, and they specifically talked about this, be able to send a telegram to everyone, every news organization on the planet, literally within minutes, and they would be able to get their message across, and then those newspapers could put it on the press, and it would be in people's hands by that evening. That has not changed to this day.
It's worse because once they saw the technology that you and your team had developed, They realized they could take this the propaganda, and it would be scalar. It could go around the world faster than any newspaper could print it. So you were too small to hold your invention, they told you. And they took it from you. They stole it from you. IBM Eclipse Foundation, James P. Chandler III, General Freeze, the Department of Defense. These people stole Michael McKibben's invention, and then they weaponized it against the people. So yes, I'm angry. And every mother, every grandmother, every patriot needs to be very upset. And we're tired of this. And pick up the phone and call your Congress people and tell them you want Michael McKibben and Leader Technologies paid, and you want every social media platform to prove their original source code because they stole it. And that's just for my opener.
Preach it, sister.
But it's true. I mean, we're fed up with this.
How did I get involved in this?
Wait a minute. I'm going to mute you just for a second right there and right there, because I don't know if you boys know this. There's a little thing out there. It's called OK Boomers. And this is where your millennials and your younger generation look to what we do as baby boomers, and they roll their eyes and they say, OK Boomers. Well, I'm telling you, boomers out there, we can be the greatest generation, and we can be the generation that sets this planet free and bring peace and prosperity. There's no need for scarcity of resources. There's plenty of energy and there's plenty of water. We've seen the technologies. They are there. They're very easy. They could be implemented in a matter of months. Now, these are your marching orders. There are things that you can do. The first thing, educate and enlighten as many people as you can to get them to the polls in 2020 to vote for Trump, because Trump knows all this stuff. He can take all this stuff down, but he needs to know he has that we have his back. So that's the first thing to do. We want you to attend the Trump rallies, because the visuals there, both inside and outside the stadiums, are very powerful. People around the world are watching. Boomers, consider this your Woodstock 2. Okay? Attend, have fun. And then the other thing that we can do, of course, is to bring to the president's attention the theft of social media. So we can take these platforms and put them in control of we the people. And when we the people use leaders' original source code to give to the president so that it can be used worldwide, we the people are going to have some terms of service for Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, and it isn't going to be the way they treat us. Now, I'll unmute you.
Amen, sister.
Wow. Yeah, I can't add anything to that.
Well, I'll add something to that, because in our experience, as we know, being our age, we couldn't have believed that the television was telling us a lie, and politicians were made or broken in a day on TV.
Right.
It depended upon the attitude that the reporters had. And nowadays, I love it when they show what's going on the TV all at once, and then you will actually see that they use the same exact words, the same exact inflection, the same exact way. They are nothing but puppets. It might as well be one station, and it's ran by banksters. Now, sometimes we get a little bit heavy with the Brits and the English-speaking people. This is a continuation of Venetian predatory banking, which went into Switzerland and Germany and Holland, and only took its home in the city of London sometime afterwards, when the Bank of England was created as a central bank. But let's just look at this. It's the same people who gave us the U.S. Fed. What happens with the U.S. Fed? Markets go up and down when the U.S. Fed speaks. Oh, the Fed speaks and markets go up and down. In other words, they make money or lose money, but they have a vested interest because we owe them over $20 trillion. What is that? That's British propaganda. Those are British bankers who own our U.S. Fed. It's the same exact people, same exact propaganda, same nonsense that we have a free market. No, we don't.
No,
and the Fed is not our friend.
We've got talk. This is worth money to them. That's all it is yapping. It creates no wealth at all. Not real wealth.
That's who these people are. They're not creative. The only people that were creative as part of the 1909 Empire Press Union were some of the writers, perhaps. But you've also shown how they brought in the Duma, the Russians, and other countries, their entire, like our Congress, to be part of this intelligence network that from the beginning
Correct.
had world hegemony as its agenda.
During that conference, they had the Ottoman Parliament there and the British and the Russian Parliament. During the conference, right when they were starting MI5 and MI6. It's real clear. These guys were very intent on taking over the world.
And they do it by stealing the technology and the patents from our entrepreneurs.
Right.
Now, if we're going to keep America great, we need to protect the property of our entrepreneurs and innovators. And that's not what's happening. You entrepreneurs out there, you think you're being protected when you take your stuff to the U.S. Office of Trademark and Patent Office, United States?
U.S. Patent Office.
Yes, U.S. Patent Office. You're not. The Brits are there. The Brits are there. Serco runs it, and they are there to steal your technology. Just ask Steve Morton. Steve Morton had this great painting system where you could paint ships and they couldn't be detected by the enemy. Well, that was stolen, left him penniless. So if you're an inventor, why would you want to invent anything when you know the U.S. government, run by Serco, is going to steal it?
Yeah, the scandal, I have yet to find an inventor who knows about Serco. And the fact that our policymakers in Washington say nothing about Serco, a British company running the U.S. Patent Office, I mean, scandals is not the right word. It's obscene. And yet and think of the confidence trick. They give us all this crap about America being the patents being one of the protected properties in the U.S. Constitution. And then at the same time, we don't even know that in 2006, Serco took over the processing of patents at the U.S. Patent Office. And we now know who's getting it. It's going through the Office of Net Assessment at the Department of Development. They're feeding it over to Britain, the Intellectual Property Institute at Serco over there, and they're deciding which items they weaponize. By doing it in Britain, they stay away from American laws on protecting intellectual property. So by the time an inventor even gets wind that their technology has been stolen, it's already been weaponized and in use, and it's all hidden behind secrecy agreements, so nobody ever finds out about it. This is the biggest scam on the planet and has been for hundreds of years.
Yes, because what they do is they're like vultures. And they see these young entrepreneurs coming out, they'll gather at like an entrepreneur organization or young president's organization, and the attorneys in the room, like the Jones Day type. Oh, they're there being your friend and everything. No, what they're doing is they're confidence artists, and they're trying to get you, and they will eventually steal your patent or your trade secrets. Isn't that right, Michael?
That is absolutely right. They've got a whole game for doing it. And the attorneys and the accountants and the financial institutions are all in on it. And they realize that young entrepreneurs, most people are probably their most creative in their 20s. And of course, people in their 20s may be intellectually creative, but they don't have the experience in business to be able to know how to interpret the things that they're being told. And so they tend to be trusting of people who say they're favorable to the entrepreneur. They want to help the entrepreneur get funding. But the game is much more complex, and it is a confidence trick to get the entrepreneur to listen to certain attorneys and certain accountants and to do it their way and not pay attention. There's a lot of shiny things going on here. So the entrepreneur who wants to focus and build something is at the same time seeing all these shiny things out there and all this gobbledygook that the attorneys and the accountants are feeding them. And so generally the organizations that are set up while the entrepreneur is inventing are basically built with booby traps in them, so that when the entrepreneur needs to then go back and get more money, they call it the second round, the third round, the fourth round, no entrepreneur thinks they can't do it with the first round of money. They all know that. And so when they get the entrepreneur to say, well, can you get it done for this $500,000 I'm going to give you? Of course, every entrepreneur says, yes, I can. That's just, they know that. And so they then build in these trap doors in the agreements that said, okay, fine, if you can do it on first round, you keep control. But if you can't, then you need to come back to the well. We're going to start exercising more control over this investment because obviously you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And so then when the entrepreneur gets to that point and they need a second round of money, that's when the vultures grab their talons on the entrepreneur and they don't let go. The other thing they do is they play a confidence game with the entrepreneur, telling them you don't have business experience, you don't know how to run a company, you're an entrepreneur, we're the smart ones, so therefore you really need to let us run this organization. And
Yeah, but
this
the thing
is
is
coming out of the Pilgrim Society.
yes. And even if you play the game and you eventually get to the patent office, then you've got these people.
Yes.
James P. Chandler did it to you, who steal what you have. And so what I'm saying here is, folks, there's two other things that you can do to help win the war. And the first thing is if you're an entrepreneur, an innovator, starve the patent office.
Right.
And we can get foreign influence out of the patent office. Your patents are not safe. Your trade secrets
protect your trade secrets.
Yes.
Do not file patent applications until the system is fixed.
Yes.
That is my firm recommendation.
Absolutely.
Trade secrets is a property.
And the other thing is turn off fake news. And that includes Fox News. Fox News is the worst. And we must, as patriots, make a stand and stop listening to this stuff. And I know you have some favorites in there, but they all work for propaganda news. And if they can't see it, then they're not doing us a service by being there as reporters and talking heads.
Can I add a piece of, most people don't understand that because Fox does a better job at putting out conservative voices. But here is a hard fact. In 2013, 12, it was at the same time as they kicked off, what's his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway,
Dan
no, as after that.
All they do is read from their Avid scripts. They give you fake news.
Well, let me specifically give this piece of information.
All right, go ahead.
I need to know the date because I don't remember the date. But anyway, a new director came to Fox News, and it was James W. Breyer. James W. Breyer was the funder of Facebook. James W. Breyer is one of the leaders of this move to China. James W. Breyer has been a director of Fox ever since. Who's the guy from Texas?
Paul Ryan?
Huh?
Paul Ryan?
Who's back on now? Now he's back pro-Trump again.
Who knows? They all are. But we know they're Trumpers.
Yeah, well, James W. Breyer is a director, and the directors have great power in those organizations. He's behind the scenes leading this drive of Fox off the cliff.
Well, what about Salem Media? They're no better. They have radio shows. A lot of Christian channels have to use Salem Media to get their word out. And we know that they are run by globalists. What's that name? Vanderloo guy that runs that thing from Google?
John Vanderloo, a longtime Google executive, is the chief technology executive at Salem Media. I don't think you need to say more than that. But if you actually look at their financials, you see these rolling loans that Salem took out in the late 1990s from a set of banks that are right smack dab in the middle of the Pilgrim Society. So it's clear that the financial interests of the world wanted to make sure they controlled the conservative voice, and they have to this day.
Absolutely. And wars are hundreds of billions of dollars for the bankers because they support both sides. They win no matter who wins. But when it comes to IP theft, let's just take right now, China. China was ready because they stole our IP. And Trump is the only person who's been able to stop them from doing that. So when we're talking about the media, we're talking about they support these things. They're supposed to be doing investigative journalism to show corruption. Really? How many reports have you seen on mainstream media about the corruption of the Clinton Foundation, the most corrupt political organization in human history, in America, of course. No, we're talking about, these are people who, for instance, you mentioned the Office of Net Assessment, that they work with globalists in the Highlands Forum Group, or Highlands Forum or Highland Group. And what do? They get together Lockheed Martin, which is owned by the Queen. They'll get together a BAE, which is British. They'll get together all the globalist interests, look at the patents that they've stolen that have been highlighted by Serco, that they need to know whether or not the Office of Net Assessment and Highland Group can in fact weaponize them. And if they can, they do. But who is the weapon given to? Everyone. Raytheon makes hypersonic missiles for China and Russia right now. This should be illegal. When the news promotes lies that affect national security or affect national economic concerns, they should be put in jail. They are, in fact, war actors. They are enemies of the state, just as the U.S. Federal Reserve is an enemy of the state. And now Trump is pointing that out. Many enemies of the state. And so the Five Eyes, we need to not have any association whatsoever with the British. We know that Crown Gate was, in fact, directed by the British. We know that Arvinder Sambhai, we know that Alison Saunders, we know that all of these different Brits, Stephen Halper, who's, of course, dual citizen, we know that Dearlove and all these
by
people.
the way, you've said this before, but Halper had received over $1 million from the Office of Net Assessment.
Exactly.
So he was actually employed by them. Why hasn't that ever come out?
Well, you brought it out. And when the news came out and said, "Oh, it's okay. He's one of us. He works for the FBI and CIA, and we paid him about they quoted a number. You had got the correct number and proven it before.
1.2 billion or million.
Yeah, and then you got exactly what reports he turned in for that huge amount of money, and they were in areas that he's not even educated in, and the reports were garbage. So therefore, to try to paint him in the media as a non-enemy of America is exactly what's going on. So the media are globalists. And we know this because really the imperialists, Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner and the British imperialists, they weren't just English. They weren't just British. They wanted world control.
Right.
They wanted absolute control of the gold, of the diamonds, of the propaganda, of the banks, of everything. And they have a two-tiered system. You're either in the peerage system, at which point you have complete immunity for any crime you want to commit, or you're not, and therefore you're on the list for eugenics, for free speech being taken from you. And just as an example, how about the lady who was over 70 years old, who simply said something on her in a Gmail message to a friend that she didn't like the Muslims because they were, doing whatever, put in jail in Britain. The British are the worst for not allowing free speech, and that has come to America through the exact same companies. A Cambridge Analytic company, which is a forensic analytic company paid for by George Soros, Atlantic Council's $1.5 billion to create the AI that controls Facebook. And then there are over a dozen truth groups now, not just Snopes, who now determines things by their feelings and emotions, they say. They can't tell you the truth anymore, and they can't tell you logic, and they can't tell you facts. They decided it's going to be okay for them to tell you it's not true because they feel that it's not true.
Hey, Douglas, I have this great building that I built with my feelings and emotions. Would you buy it from me, please?
No, I don't like the color, and my feelings and emotions don't agree.
Oh, you make me feel bad in saying that.
I'm so sorry. I'll buy it now because I had to see to the lowest common denominator if I'm going to be a true leftist.
Okay. So the point of today's audio, folks, is we wanted to bring your attention to the 6-page PDF. It's in the description box. Take a look at it. Make sure you preserve a copy, because once history is made and we find the truth history, it can't be redone. And that's what they fret. Okay, there it is.
There's part of it.
Oh, it's a huge, beautiful document. And closing, I'd like Douglas, you to do a closing. I want to ask you a specific question, but before then, Michael, do you have any parting words about that particular PDF?
Well, as we have lived with these facts now for several months, you get to know people, And what we see in this group of people is an extremely haughty bunch of men. And there was one token woman, by the way, in one of the books. And I think she
I'm
was,
the token woman here, right?
no,
Okay,
you're the boss.
that's right.
Anyway, this was a male invention. And the bottom line is these guys were very on intent to do what they do. And so what we can see now is what a group of men really intent on taking power from the standpoint of the British, what they can do to alter history for at least 120 years. Now we're here talking about it now. It hasn't been talked, this stuff hasn't been talked about in this way. And what we see is this fusion of forces that created this long-term strategy. And we have to understand where this comes from because we can't understand the mentality that created it. But what we see now, in addition to what they actually have done, is their belief is that they are owed the respect of the entire world. And if you don't acknowledge that, then we are going to eliminate you or sideline you. That is their plan. And so they, because of this, these newspaper men seized control of the intelligence organizations in the British government and eventually in the US government. And they have not let go at all. And so what I call it coincidence if you like, my first shareholder or my first director was General James Fries, who was actually the creator of Echelon, which was the original NSA spying operation for the planet in conjunction with these Pilgrim Society organizations. And so we see it wasn't many years between 1909 and the Second World War, and then when most of us were born. And so we have been the victims, we have been the targets, and we're waking up. And we need to fully wake up. And then what we need is President Trump to fund the Miller Act notice, because that shifts the cash flow away from the complete control of these oligarchs, these evil people. There's another name that's been created called the fake news intelligencers. And we need to shift it to patriots who, with those resources, can actually develop a truly accountable fourth estate that will hold the powerful accountable, and then its cash flow will not be beholden to the corporatists who have created this system with only one source of cash. And that has been the difficulty. So what we have with what's going on now is we, the people around the planet, are finally saying, no, we want the resources because we're going to build a system that is truly accountable in this world. And then we are going to see creativity explode on this planet instead of it being suppressed as it's been.
Yes. And Douglas, this is more than an information war, isn't it? It's a spiritual war. Can you speak to that and close us out?
Yes. As a matter of fact, Rudolf Steiner, the great philosopher and scientist, said that at our time we would be fighting secret brotherhoods. And it's sad. No sisters in them, no women, just brothers. And these brotherhoods, we all knew, of course, he was referring to the fact that the Roman, basically Roman legalism came into Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church, and through Jesuitism became then a incredible power on the face of the earth through liberation theology, socialism, basically what I would call chaos Marxism, because then it creates circumstances where the Pope can become rich by being funded to support refugees. Well, this kind of system, Rudolf Steiner said, would be driven by secret brotherhoods. Well, we assumed, of course, that meant the papacy. And then of course, that means some of the Masons who were the anti-papists. They were the ones who went underground to teach what wasn't allowed to be taught overtly by the Catholic Church. And so this type of subterfuge and infiltration and espionage turned into corporate espionage when they started to realize that they could steal and the banksters can actually control these things. So after the Masons, of course, we all hear about the Illuminati, which was simply a form of masonry, the Frater Lucis, that would allow Jews to become Masons. And so you see the whole British Zionism movement was simply an attempt of non-Jews to claim Jewish land using Jews in settlements to try to take over the Levant. Well, this is the work of the imperialists. So you could say the imperialists that were characterized by particularly, and truly a model of it was Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner. These type of imperialists were another secret brotherhood. And then we hear about this organization that really was the beginning of press becoming an intelligence agency. But behind it was what Rudolf Steiner pointed out were secret brotherhoods. The Pilgrim Society with the Frankfurt School, with Tavistock and war propaganda, clearly wishes to stop you from thinking. It's as simple as that. That's why they put fluoride in our water. That's why they put poisons in our food. That's why they try to dumb you down, numb you down by giving you so much pornography, sports, entertainment, gambling on the internet. The number one thing on the internet is pornography. So when it comes down to it, people who don't have brains and are very low informed, they don't really listen to the news. They listen to news chatter and they believe whatever rises to the surface, and that is the worst of propaganda. So what we have here is the fact that the Fourth Estate has become a machine to destroy the ability for humans to have free thinking. It's as simple as that. And it is, in fact, the secret brotherhood's intent.
Okay. So now you guys on the other end, please spread the word. Make sure your audiences are educated about truth history. Make sure to download that PDF and share it wide and far. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy.